saw the red light, sorry.
It's got a delay, so.
Red light go.
Oh, wait.
Okay, we're on now.
Delay.
Okay, now we'll officially call the March 25th Finance Administration Committee meeting to order and welcome all who are here. Happy Tuesday. No members of the public are here. Anybody want to speak as a member of the public instead of a member of the committee?
Are we allowed to do that?
Wow.
You're a citizen.
Then I got something I want to
All right, we'll move on to presentation and discussion items. Mr. Elliott, sorry, an update on current projects.
All right, in your packet, again, is your list of projects that we have. The first couple of pages are the annual fund projects, and the last page is green and white stripe, or paid for by the restricted funds, which we have several of. But there's not really anything in particular to touch on, other than we did get approval. I believe it might have been yesterday when I got back from Alabama. I saw that we had received approval from RIA for us to execute that contract with Harper to do the dewatering equipment replacement. So you won't see that noted on here, and I had not executed the agreement as of yet anyways either, but trying to make sure RA is fine with us doing that electronically and not having 3 wet signatures on 3 separate versions of the contract. So once we get that done, the board's already authorized for it to be executed, so that'll be kind of a big step, and that's to be paid for by SCIP money. Really, that's pretty much the only thing really worth calling out that's changed considerably since this was put together middle of last week. So I'll take any questions you may have on anything on that or anything else.
Anybody have any questions?
What's the significance of the road number? Is this in any kind of order?
It's real, no, the significance of that isn't so much for you guys, but it's when Kyle and I, we meet every couple of weeks to go over this. And he'll kind of update me with where we are, and instead of he trying to read out the name of whatever it is he's giving an update on, he'll just say row 13.
Can we move, like, maybe the completed items to a separate page as completed, or just from an organization standpoint, as we review it? Like at the end, just move all the 100% completed that isn't an ongoing project to it?
Yeah, I can do that. I don't know how, the only question I have with that is if it's gonna do anything with the conditional formatting that I have in the table. Because again, this really, Mr. Ferris, and Mr. Ferris, I think, was on that committee at that time too. The O&P committee was aware that Kyle and I were doing these and it was put together. This is still, this isn't really put together for the committee. This is for us to track projects internally. So it may be easier for me to hide the rows that are complete, but that'll leave the road numbers.
Yeah, I think it, reflecting that in the report are good, but I was just thinking maybe moving to the end of the completed page, projects are completed, but whatever.
Yeah, I'll check.
That spreadsheet OCD's kicking in.
Yeah, I'll look at it and see if it, as long as it doesn't mess up the conditional formatting, then I'll look and see, and maybe I just remove the color, and that'll, the alternating colored rows, and that may fix it.
It don't matter.
Too, so. But I'll play around with it.
If it's more for you internally, then I wouldn't adjust it.
But we are, I will say too, I think I mentioned this at the O&P meeting, that the number of these projects on the first sheet that have been at 0%, we're finally now starting to see some of this equipment come in that has been on order or that we've had to go out and get bids for. So some of these projects are finally going to be moving forward to completion. There was a few of them that are on here that we had decided we were not going to do, or we were going to use the funding that was set aside for that for something that was deemed a higher priority and came in over budget from what we anticipated, like such as I think the paving work that was going to be done around here. So
Glad Dick Mack was not here.
So, But yeah, that pretty much is it. So if you have any questions about any of this stuff, now or anytime, just let me know.
Anybody have any questions? All right, we'll move on to our second item, considering possible increases to impact fees based on the March 6th board meeting discussion.
All right, so with that, I'll give you just a little bit of a brief, why is this on the agenda, and then I'll let you know, because this was also on the O&P committee agenda as well. So, and this had to do with the discussion that we had at the last board meeting where Darrell Parker and Lawrence Flynn were both present, at least participated in that meeting, and both stated that the way we're going to have to do things in the future as far as funding for these projects, that the less we collect in impact fees to pay for growth-related projects, the more that was going to put on the, I think they like to use the word the ancestral customer, the customer that's already been on the system, and that they're going to have to pay with rates. So it was decided when they brought that up, just and as part of the budget process, since now we set the fees or consider the fees at the same time as part of the entire budget package for the following or the coming fiscal year, that I would go ahead and put it out there for the committees and ultimately for the board to decide if any change would be considered or would want to be considered for the coming year. And I believe, all of you guys are very familiar with it. You sat through the presentation of, how Weston and Sampson came up with the recommended fees that we had adopted or partially adopted back a couple of years ago, when the recommendation was $24.50 per gallon, and it was decided we would go with $15.25 per gallon. But where the matter is, and I had this drawn up, and I don't know if I showed it the O&P committee, the F&A committee, or the board, but it was on, and it may still be on the whiteboard, but it was an illustration, what you see on page
It was us.
1 of this, to show that even with the $15.25 per gallon that we're collecting that based on the average water used by a residential customer, or by any customer, residential, non-residential, but through a different meter size. But for the typical subdivision that we have here as an example, because I think it would be the easiest one to understand, is when these systems are designed and permitted by the state, they're permitted based on a regulatory design flow at 300 gallons per home per day use. Our impact fee is based on the average use of being 150 gallons per day, which is an actual, if you go and read the memorandum, it was the average that was calculated across based on the average use of the number of customers that, that Jason and Weston and Sampson looked at in their study. But instead of paying the $24.50 at 300 gallons per day, our customers for subdivisions, and in this case, or even a regular residential house, a one-off house, is paying $15.25 for 150 gallons. So, working through the sheet, the illustration, for a 100-house subdivision, it leaves a difference of close to $400,000 between what was recommended to be collected per, and what DHEC permits them at, and what we are actually bringing in for that same type of development. So say all of that for the committees and board ultimately decide if they would want to make a change. Now, again, I think this study and recommendation from Weston and Sampson was from 2023, and I think you heard in the presentation that those costs have only gone up since then. So I don't have a recommendation. This is a recommendation for those that sit around the table as far as what they wish to do. Because, on one hand, it affects economic development. On the other hand, it affects your existing customers, both residential and non-residential, because eventually they're the ones that we have to pay for when we have to do.
Well, it significantly affects home affordability, which is something that this area is dealing with now from a, entry-level cost standpoint. You have a lot of families who can't, single people, married couples, families who can't afford to buy a house right now.
Mhm.
So that's what it really affects is home affordability, much less economic development. That's gonna occur anyway. It's just at what level? So you're saying right now it's $15.50,
$15.25.
$15.25 for 150 gallons?
No, $15.25 per gallon times 150.
150.
So it's about
But the DHEC
2,300.
standard rate's 300.
Yeah, their standard rate's 300 gallons per day.
What does it look like, instead of raising the rate, we raise the amount of gallons per lot?
Well, if you do, so say you go to. we
I'd rather
adjust
be able
that.
to point to a DHEC standard versus point to an increased rate.
Yeah.
Well, with the DHEC standard, it is what it is. So there's no adjusting that. So, again, a 100 home subdivision, 300 gallons per day per home is 30,000 gallons that gets attached to the plant here. In reality, you may feel the impact of half that again.
The impact, but it's still permitted, right?
It's
It's
still
still
permitted.
300,
It
and
counts
that's
against
where
the
you
permit.
go,
That's right.
that's what you count when you look at expansion
Exactly.
requirements, right?
Yes.
So I'd rather be able to sit here and say, look, guys, we're complying with what the DHEC,
Standard.
residential,
Flow.
anticipated flow or calculated flow is for purposes of our plant. That's what we have to collect on versus just an arbitrary, I won't say arbitrary, but a rate increase.
Mhm.
So if we adjust the amount of gallons that we apply the rate towards for each lot, what does that look like?
So if you go to, say you.
It should
kept
double
the-
it, right?
Yeah, say you kept the same rate that we have now.
It should double it.
25 at 300 gallons per day, that's $4,600. It doubles the impact fee.
I mean, if we're gonna consider it, in my opinion, that I think we, if we're gonna be charged a capacity usage out here for every house, we need to align our impact fee with that, because that's what the impact fee is there for, is to satisfy that used capacity for expansion down the road. I'd rather just align the amount of gallons we use and keep the rate lower.
That way, it accurately reflects what we have in their checkbook at the state, at DHEC, or DES. Because that's what they base it on.
Right.
We're permitting 300 gallons per house, correct?
Mhm.
So that gets us to that magical 80% number faster, and we're not collecting for that capacity, regardless of what we actually see, because that's not, DHEC doesn't look at what we see, they look at what they require, correct?
Right.
Correct.
So,
And what the O&P committee asked us to do is they asked me to get Jason Gillespie to
This ain't
update.
the OEP.
They asked to update the memo, to get Jason to get us more accurate numbers, not only with the cost per gallon, but also to look at what the surrounding
Well, then we're asking
communities.
Jason, when he does that, to give a secondary alternative for adjusting gallons versus the rate. I'd rather be able to tie it to something that's regulatory versus financial.
So actually use the design calculations that are set forth by DHEC
Yeah.
as opposed to, the
that
rate,
makes sense.
the rate would stay the same, but use,
300 gallons versus
I
150?
mean, if that's what we're getting billed, I guess, by DES against our capacity, then that should be what we're billing the developer, right?
well, the only thing with that though, is it takes us back to the way we used to do the impact fee calculation, which was a very difficult manner to do the calculation, because it's one thing when it's homes, it's another thing when you're coming up with the impact fee for grocery stores or a gymnasium or any of these other things that you use that, I'll call it Appendix A, but what that is Regulation 6167. Appendix A is where these calculations come from. And why we decided to go with the water meter size and the average flow through these meters is because it makes it so much easier. Otherwise, we're having to calculate square footage of locations, and it would take, I mean, not exaggerating, there were some projects that would take
Well,
an
who-
I
hour.
understand. If
more.
you have a formula in which you plug 150 in, how does the formula change if you plug 300 in?
That doesn't change, but the subdivisions are just one of the things we look at.
So do they not come to you with a design flow let them calculate that and say, this is our design flow for this project?
That's, if you do it for a line extension, it's one thing, which a subdivision is gonna be, or an apartment complex if they're doing a line extension to serve inside there. But if it's for, say, Target, well, that's a bad example too, because there's gonna be a line extension. But if it's gonna be for, say, like a community center, where you're gonna have sewer there, you're connecting to it, they're not providing you with any calculations. They're not having to go and get a construction permit from the state to build it.
But they're gonna have a consultant designing the property, laying property out.
They have to have an architect.
They're gonna have an architect.
Stamp plans.
So have them
They're gonna have
design it.
site layout, they're gonna have site piping. I mean, basically, you tell them, I need to know what's coming out of this pipe at the connection point, or
Mhm.
what you anticipate, what's your design flow. Because, I mean, the ones I've seen in the past, typically, there's a box that's got fixture units and things like that. All they would have to do would be put that together and give you that number, that final, I would think, that final design flow. That way, that's not something that you should have to deal with. They should come to you with a request for a capacity in the system.
Capacity flow.
You base your impact fee on their request.
Mhm.
Not what they feel like they actually will flow, but what the design
Design
capacity
flow,
flow is,
Yes,
right?
because
So-
that's what we have to deal with when it comes up, is design flow. I mean, just like this.
Well, that, we could do that, that'd be fine too, but the other thing is, you're an engineer, those numbers are gonna be overly conservative. So you talk about, just like the 300 gallons per day for a house, those costs are gonna be high, because that's not what they're actually gonna be. They're gonna be designing for peak, they're gonna give you the peak flow at those locations and not the ADF.
Well, I mean, that's up to them to determine that.
I'll talk with
Would you not?
Jason and see
I
if he can give us a update the existing, and then also give us an alternative way to do the calculating. But if it has to go back to where we're doing it, it's, like I say, it is a difficult, time-consuming endeavor. If it's something, anything other than a house takes a good bit of time to do it, especially if it's gonna be something mixed use. You gotta,
So there's no defined flow for anything but a house. So there's not a 300 number for a gas station.
there is, but is the gas station, are they gonna have food service at the gas station? Are they gonna have a car wash at the gas station? So you have to go, and those are all separate numbers that you have in there. Does the gas station have sit-down seating at a restaurant? Is it open 24 hours a day or limited hours? So it gets to be a complex calculation.
So how does DHEC quantify a commercial property's capacity charge?
So
Do we tell DHEC what that gas station's gonna be?
no, the design engineer would do it, but you don't have it on, if it's not a line extension, they don't have to tell DHEC anything, because they don't have to get a permit to do it. You go and build, like the Performing Arts Center, there's already sewer available. There's no line extension to serve it for them to go to DHEC or DES to get a construction permit. So they don't have to go and present a design calculation for what they.
So how did you charge me my impact fee for that?
Well, for that one, there isn't one, because it
already
was
had
an
tap.
existing tap, and it was, but if it was gonna be a new building with a new tap, the way we would do it now is it would be, you're gonna put in a 2-inch water meter. So that's what the impact fee would be based on 2-inch water meter, not the number of seats in the theater plus any food service there may be there. So that's how it is. We did it using the DES, DHEC model for years until, I think it was 2021. Does that sound right? I think you were on that committee. We had an ad hoc committee that put together a recommendation that we wanted to change to what we do now, because to make it easy for everyone. But the houses, again, the houses are the easy ones. The apartments,
I still would be more in favor of adjusting the capacity usage as defined here at the plant by DES, and then a submitted capacity calculation or flow calculation from the design architect and civil engineers.
Correct. And that way, I mean, it takes the burden off of you. They would be responsible to determine the flow or the demand.
I'd be fine with it. I have no issues.
Now, you'd have to verify it. I mean, you'd have to pull a sample every now and then and verify that they're not, adjusting their numbers inappropriately.
Yeah, I'd have no issues with doing that, especially if it's gonna be them doing it. But again, you can ask Mr. Ferris. I don't know, you guys y'all didn't charge impact fees, I don't believe. But it is, you go back to that old way, and it is a very difficult calculation. But if somebody else is gonna be doing it for you, and they're gonna be signing their name with their license credential,
Well, I mean,
then
that's
have
how
no
I see
issues.
it. I mean, you've got enough going right now. You don't need to add anything to it, but it also needs to be fair to the organization and to the business or whoever the developer coming in. And their own design folks will be the ones determining that. So
There's also, you do also have, you run into the case where you don't have, the entity may not be using an architect or an engineer to do something. They're maybe doing something on their own. So, we still
If it's
get, and I
commercial,
think
they
the
can.
cities,
If it's commercial, they have to have a licensed contractor and architecturally stamped plans if they're doing any kind of construction.
so,
They have to. Now, residential, a homeowner can build themselves, but not commercial.
and that's just flat.
That's a flat.
Yeah, that's it. So,
well, I got one, just an example, without naming where it is or what it was. It was they wanted to build a new pool house for a property that they intend to rent out, maybe use as like an Airbnb or something like that. And the guy, he was gonna build it himself, and I think he got the building permit to do it. The drawings we got, no plumbing plans. It was, he's a general contractor, not an engineer, not an architect. We were fine with it, we approved it. He paid the impact fees because of the way we have it set now. So now, in those cases, again, he's licensed, he's a contractor. Now he's gonna have to go and get an architect or an engineer to do those calculations for him, because he's not gonna be familiar with that process.
No, and I think that's, where you guys would step in to assist him with that calculation on adding a pool house. If those are the one-offs, right? And we're not asking you to do it for every one.
would that be considered a commercial property?
Well, that's the other thing too, is if he, and that's kind of a discussion that we had is no, it's not a commercial property now, but if they were to make it into an event center down the road, nothing changes, they'll use more water, but there's no way for us to go back and recapture that impact when it changes from residential.
But our capacity hasn't changed at the plant either.
Capacity hasn't changed.
So, I mean, you're capturing the additional flow, you're charging for the additional flow, but that additional flow hasn't used up any of your permitted capacity of the plant, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I'm even trying to think now, like just say a pool house, they go and do that, I think they're getting a separate water meter for it possibly, or getting a separate sewer tap. And
Our flow isn't even coming close to what our permitted capacity is, so you've got that buffer zone of those situations where, yeah, your flow increases, but your capacity hasn't changed. I don't, maybe I'm overcomplicating this.
Sorry. Thought I had turned off. Anything to add?
trying to make it simple.
Yeah, it's one of those, obviously for staff, you wanna make it simple, but you also wanna make it fair. And if someone is, according to the checkbook, is using more, but just because of the line, they're getting it cheaper than somebody down the street, that's not really fair either. So we need to make it equitable for
I
all
guess,
the users.
you know, my analogy with that, and I understand what you're saying, I do, but just to kind of play devil's advocate, you know, you've got to, you know, and I guess I'm speaking, you talk about member of the public. Here's my member of the public. So, you know, where I live, I don't live in the area, but where I live, my house has been there. There used to be a sewer lagoon behind the house that I reside in. The old clay pipe still exists. It goes down there. It's abandoned. It's been gone a long time because now that lagoon is now part of Lake Hartwell. So we eventually, you know, the city came and they ran sewer lines and connected to a pump station that pumps it up to the treatment plant. So my house has been on sewer before the city had its existing treatment plant. Why do I need to pay an impact fee? I don't. It's been accounted for years. Well, what's happened now is that because of the city, is growing, you know, they're growing. They need to expand one of the 2 treatment plants they're involved in. So I wish I could remember, but there were considerable rate increases coming for us for the next 5 years, that ancestral user, because the growth is occurring and the amount of revenue or the amount of money that they have collected in those fees did not offset the cost of expanding that plant. So within the next 5 years, if I calculated it right, my sewer bill is going to be, just the sewer portion of it, $70, $80, $90 a month. So, you know, so you've got that. The other thing is too, with a town, you know, you paving a street using your ad valorem, your property taxes has been collected to pay for it. The street paving's done over here. You're not having just the people on the street pay for it. All the, you know, because eventually everybody's going to receive, you know, their street's going to be paved too, right? And those may be bad analogies, I know, but it's kind of the whole, at what point do you get to who pays for what? You know, you've had
Well,
some
with
that
this
said the
being-
growth should pay for growth.
Yeah, well, with this being impact, not the ancestral or the existing customer rate, then trying to make it as fair as possible for what they're actually getting.
The actual impact.
And, I mean, just using the house as the example, and I know that's the easy one, but if they are getting the 300, then why would you give them a 50% discount?
But that's where, like, and I understand that, but we're also where they're getting the discount in this case. And again, I'm wanting everybody to kind of think it all through so that there's some kind of consensus and understanding. If they go from the 150 to 300 gallons, they're getting the full gallons, right? They're not getting it based on the water meter size anymore, but they're still getting a $15.25 rate versus the $24.50 rate. So there still is, it brings it closer to what the actual cost of that impact is, but it's still gonna be more than half, but not, it's still gonna be $10 below what that cost was recommended to be 2 years ago. And that difference, again, you have one opportunity to collect it, like what Lawrence and Darrell were saying, you can't go back and you can't overcharge it. It's just got to be based on something factual, which our study says. But you can't go back afterwards, and if it's $24.50, you can't say, well, now our rate's going to be $70, $60.
But if they're only actually, if you say they're only actually using 150, they're almost paying double for that.
Mm-hmm. But that's, again, that's based on the state's standards for what it takes to design a pump station or a line or a treatment plant. The issue with that really is the state's numbers are too conservative. But that's what we have to
But
build
if
to.
our credit, or whatever you want to call it, with the state, our capacity for the plant, each time the house goes on, we're charged 300 gallons. And they're paying 300, but in actuality, they're only using 150. They're basically paying $30.50 for that at this rate, correct?
But,
For the actual capacity
Yeah.
that they're using.
the thing too, we get to that 80% having to start design. Our checkbook, I might have it here, I don't know. Our checkbook, as of, this was maybe a month and a half old now, is 4.7 million gallons. That's what we have allocated to the treatment plant now. But our average daily flow to the treatment plant is about let's call it 3.1 million gallons. We do see it in excess of 5 or 6 at certain times due to inflow infiltration. But you take rainfall, groundwater out of the equation, these dry months, what we're actually seeing in true sewer flow is, I think, we saw we're like, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 million gallons last summer during our driest period. So that shows you right there what we actually do receive from these customers that are connected to sewer. But that's not what we're required to build to. And there is a method that I understand exists where the state, and I don't know if they still would allow it, but a couple of years ago when we looked into it, they did still do it. There was an agreement that you could take out with DES where you kept your own checkbook and it was based on actual flow, and if you wanted to design and add homes at 150 gallons or whatever you wanted to do to the treatment plant, you could do it. You had an agreement with DES, but if you were in violation, if you had an exceedance of flow, then from what I understood, you were going to get hammered. So with knowing the I&I issues that we have to correct first, I wasn't going to begin considering something like that because we would be hammered monetarily through penalties for exceeding the flows. But, there's that other option out there, but I think we're a good ways away from being able to track those internally. And again, I don't have a recommendation as far as what to do, because it is I see it from every side and I see it from in the middle too. But that's why, this isn't a matter for me to recommend what we need to do. This is a matter of just having that discussion here to make that determination as to what we should do come July 1st with any rate changes that we do have.
Well, it seems like consensus here is to at least investigate what it would look like to connect it more to the checkbook, how much of the capacity as opposed to the meter line. If I'm misrepresenting, somebody jump in and correct me. And if OMP's already asked to go with Mr. Gillespie and just get some updated numbers, if we could just ask him to look at that as well, that would give 2 different options for the board to consider.
I still like Scott's idea of requiring a submission from the project for calculated flow.
I mean, if
Take
they
that off
can't-
of you.
If they can't do it, you can always also come up with something in the fee of what you would charge if they don't have someone that can do it, if they are requesting y'all services.
And your 1 out of 10 handful, outliers where you have to help them calculate it is certainly still gonna save you a lot more time than having to do it all yourself to begin with.
Yeah.
So,
Anything else on that one?
or if we did look at, go back and this doesn't work and we have to look at a pure rate increase, a 3-year phase in is something that I would request, so.
Okay. Moving on, priorities for compliance and capital projects for the fiscal year 2026.
All right, in attachment C, near the end of your packet here, you see 2 pages, and right away, notice this in the last one. The total cost for annual flow metering is not $800,000 a year. It should be $40,000 per year. But on top of some of these items that we have to do, we currently budget the $200,000 for CCTV and cleaning. We currently budget for the flow metering. We currently budget for the mapping every year. Is there anything on this list that strikes your fancy that you think we should consider moving forward with in the budget development process for fiscal year 26 and beyond? You've heard me mention that I am going to include in the request the replacement of the Speech Creek force main. Now, I don't know, that cost, that $2.7 million estimated cost, which includes design and contingency, that would be something that would be spread across a couple of years. The design process will take a little bit of time, so it may not even be bid until the following year, 27. But is there anything in here that you'd like for us to begin looking at taking a bite out of, whether it be design or design and construction?
Okay, I know this is just, I'm not seeing it, my eyes are not that good this morning, I guess. You've got a couple that have the elimination by the Davis Creek sewer, but where is the Davis Creek sewer on here?
That would be a separate project. So those, when you get into that, this list is just a copy of every item that's on there, but the Davis Creek sewer project,
It obviously wasn't
Is-
priority
that's-
1A or 1B.
that's correct.
Okay.
It's in a priority 2 or 3 or 4.
We probably need to decide if
So how much
that
was
was
Davis
a
Creek?
definite before we put anything on those 3.
Davis Creek. So Davis Creek #1 pump station, which also was meant to serve the Newry area development as well, is $22 million.
So obviously the elimination of those doesn't add up.
That's right.
Yeah.
We'll live at around 7.
I thought maybe we'd get lucky. And,
That would be
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be
nice.
nice if that was only like 6 million.
Yeah.
I mean, does it do anything else? Could it take any others off?
Now,
In the future?
I think that it could, I think there was 4 or 5 pump stations that it would be able to eliminate, and by extending gravity sewer up to some. But again, that's a pretty costly endeavor, and that's a highly growth
It was worth asking.
item, growth related item.
Anybody have any recommendations or questions about any of these?
No, I mean, I certainly leave it up to you and staff, Chris, to decide what's more important off that list. Start trying to bite off.
I mean, I always recommend the low hanging fruit, but other than that.
We're gonna try, talking with Kyle, we're gonna try to continue making improvements here at the treatment plant to get it to where we can, at the very least, operate the plant fully as designed. We still can't operate, estimate maybe a quarter to a third of the facility.
I mean, if you got a tank you can't use because it needs 200 grand worth of refurbishment, then
Mhm.
obviously
Go do that.
spend the 200 grand worth of refurbishment.
Right,
So you
that's
can
right.
start using it to its fullest.
And that's what, we've been biting slowly biting off, 100,000 here, a couple 100,000 there. We're getting ready, on that blue sheet here, Code Utility, I think is getting ready to start a $350,000 equipment valve replacement project. It's budgeted for this, this current year. So we are working those in so that we can slowly get the plant back to where it's fully operational. So, and we'll continue to do that.
Any other thoughts or questions? Looks like we're gonna leave it in the hands of staff. Committee action items, the February and year-to-date financial reports.
Exhibit D in your packet. We will certainly field any questions you may have about any or all of the items in there. Do you have any comments or anything that you?
Does anybody have any concern about the way the numbers are tracking at this point in the year?
No.
We on track?
If there's no questions, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the submit.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of accepting the the reports as presented, say aye.
Aye.
All right, unanimous. No other action items for the recommendation to the board. Any discussion from the director?
No, ma'am.
All right.
Oh. How?
Is there any discussion among the committee members for future meetings?
Madam Chair, I'm just happy to be here.
We all are.
Happy to be here.
The sun is
Part of the
shining
group.
and
That's all. Just glad to be part of the team.
February 22nd work for everybody?
Yes, ma'am?
Say February 22nd.
Excuse me, April 22nd. April 22nd. My apologies. All right, if there is nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, 9:45, we are adjourned.
If anybody wants to come out and watch some good baseball tomorrow night,
There you go.